Heavy metal, parking lot, American Black Lager, Judas Priest. Wow, it's a 6.66%. Maybe this is apropos for this this rant, which it's a rant, guys. You know what a rant is? It's one of those things where you just talk, and I get comments, people saying, "Man, you could have said that in way less time." It's a rant. Anyway, look at that. That's a black bear. Holy cow. Hey guys, what's up? Audiophile here with KissAnalog.com. I want to talk about this $1 million challenge that was put out to see if someone could tell the difference between one cable, a low-cost cable, and a high-cost cable, and how it never took place. And you have to wonder why. That's a lot of money. If it's so easy to tell the difference between cables, then why wouldn't somebody just jump on that, right? Well, God, there is so much confusion on cables. I'm doing a bunch of testing now to try to see if I can find something about a cable. I mean, you know, I'm an engineer. I've got a background. I've been in EMI chambers, very expensive chambers with very expensive equipment, and doing tests for things like our fighter jets and International Space Station. I mean, I've worked on a lot of sophisticated things, a lot of very expensive things where there is no dollars. No one cares how much things cost. We had these diodes in this power supply, and they were custom made for this power supply. They were super expensive. They're rated for, you know, the rad hard diodes, no less. So custom for us plus a rad hard, it was just super expensive. So if we can do something to improve EMI performance, we're talking high frequency stuff, sensitive electronics, things that, you know, are very important. I mean, people's lives are at stake. It's not just, oh, can you hear that? Oh, can you measure that? You know, the idea that you cannot measure what we can hear is BS. It's completely fabricated BS. That sound comes out of speakers, and speaker manufacturers are constantly, there's guys on YouTube that do speaker upgrades, and they show you the difference in the value based on these measurements. And it should make you kind of wince a little bit when somebody says, oh man, I changed out my power cable, and geez, the dark's got darker, the bright, you know, it just opened up the sound stage. I mean, you must have had a pretty crummy stereo system if one little change like that, if it could make a difference, it would be a nuance. It wouldn't be like, oh, geez, just things got so much better. I mean, that's just absolutely absurd, right? So it's just crazy that the audiophiles have driven this idea that there's things out there that we can't measure that we can hear. That's just nuts. Maybe we just don't know how to measure it. Maybe we don't know how to quantify it. And why is that? Well, unlike the space station or you know, F-18 jet, F-22, whatever, advanced tactical fighter jet, you know, things like that. Well, I worked on the ATF and the F-15s as far as fighter jets go, and on the International Space Station. You know, those things somewhat sophisticated, right? But if those same engineer teams worked on audio stuff, these things would be solved. But it's not. It's done by, there's guys on YouTube, and there's this one guy who's done some testing, and I thought, God, is he an engineer? But then the things he says and stuff, I go, yeah, I don't know about this guy. There's guys like Amir from Audio Science Review. 2 big thumbs up to Amir from Audio Science Review, guys. I mean, what can he say that you can't agree with? Because he can prove it. He can measure it. And he's an audio guy. That's why he's interested in this. So it's not that, you know, there's this science versus people that like listen to audio and just, oh, I just want to listen to it. Oh, that's how you tell the difference. No, that's placebo, guys. That's just, you know, I get one of these fancy cables from Kimber Cable, which I do think their technology, it makes sense to me. I want to find ways or reasons why this stuff works, if it does. I want to see if it does. I think it's really cool looking. It's just neat. And I bought those. They weren't given to me. But unlike, you know, this other guy who measures stuff, I watched his videos. I thought, wow, this is cool. Someone's actually done some measurements. They bought this stuff off eBay, which admittedly there's nothing wrong with that. I bought some of my stuff off eBay. Some of the stuff over here, a lot of this stuff was given to me. Some of this stuff I bought. Those two things, or several of those things over there. But yeah, I bought them used. I didn't buy. Let me see. Anyway, there might be some new stuff I bought, but most of the stuff I buy used. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you hear someone talk about measurements and how they did testing, that's when you go, that person's not an engineer. He doesn't. He's been helped by other people in the community that helped him and led him on doing certain types of tests, which were completely meaningless, even though, well, I could hear this, and so I could correlate this test result with what I heard. That's the placebo effect working very well. So, and we know the placebo effect is a scientific fact too, and it's something that's proven and measured. So, all things can be measured. It's just how do you measure them? When I get to speaker cables, I feel like we're going to find some things. I'm pretty sure about that. I've done a lot of studying, and that's what led me to some of these people. And man, I felt like it wasn't a waste of time watching the videos, because at least it kind of led me on to some of the things that have been done. Wow, that's a nice strong beer. But yeah, so here's the thing is, for instance, that guy that did these tests, my wife doesn't want me to call out names, and I don't want to really beat up on people, but I feel like if you've been on YouTube and you're trying to sell yourself a certain way, I feel like you should be held responsible to some effect, right? So anyway, this person, if you've watched the videos, you'll know who I'm talking about. He says, one thing he says, to me, I mean, this is my humble opinion, my opinion of what I heard from this person, okay? And in fact, this is a rant. Everything I say here is just my opinion. So anyway, what's beeping at me? I think this guy just timed out. Anyway, so here's the thing is, all right, guys, so this person, listening to him, I just felt like he was contradicting himself. For instance, I'm sure he thought, well, people are going to say, well, you tested all these cables. That's got to be very tiring. At some point, it was ineffectual. You couldn't have been, very effective in doing these tests. You might have started off doing a good job, maybe, if your protocols or the way your methodology was set up right. But eventually, you're going to just get tired. And so I'm sure he thought, or he could see people coming back at him with that. So he reported that, hey, and I took rests, I took breaks, so I was fresh. I stayed fresh and I was good for these tests. But then later on, when he basically wanted to pat himself on the back, I think, for doing all this testing and doing all this arduous work, which, hey, that's great, but then the problem was then he said, oh, now I need a break. That was tiring. That really took it out of me. I guess the last test, he just fell off the cliff. Up until that, the little rest in between was perfect. It's like, wow, okay, I'm ready for the next test. And then all of a sudden, wow, that last test, geez, what happened? That just killed me. I gotta take a break. So, I mean, it's a contradiction. The obvious thing is testing that many cables. Anybody else on YouTube that's tested cables will say, hey, I've tried to do 5 cables, and I recommend doing 2 cables. Like another guy who I listen to, who sounds great, has a very good voice, he explains things very well, and he's actually very honest, and he doesn't contradict himself. Well, okay, so this other person, I'll jump over to him for a moment. What he says is, he says, okay, here, I think I wrote down some of these things. He talks about certain effects that some people have thought that could be meaningful. One is skin effect. Well, I can tell you that's not meaningful for audio. But anyway, that's something that comes up because it's something in physics that happens with current at high frequencies. As current starts to go faster and faster, higher frequency, that it starts to go to the outside. It's a skin effect, okay? So at certain higher frequencies, the current's mostly traveling on the outside, so it has to be a certain thickness to do it. So if you have a big conductor, then you might have enough current capability with just the skin, right? But if you have a whole bunch of strands, it goes around each strand. Now, if the strand is a certain thickness, maybe the skin is all the way to the center, so it needs lots of strands so that it can parallel, right? So anyway, it's not a big deal. And most speaker wire has lots of strands, and the frequency is just barely starting to get to the point where it's starting to go away from center. Low frequencies, like most of what audio is, it just travels slowly up and down the wire. By the way, current's going up and down. There's no direction. So he didn't talk about this, but you know where they put directionality on wires? That's completely utter bullshit. So, oh, sorry for my French. You didn't know I spoke French. But anyway, sorry. I mean, anyway, that's an old term. I don't know if that's all right to say these days. Anyway, yeah, AC. Guys, audio is AC, alternating current. Goes this way, goes that way, equally. If it went mostly this way, not as much this way, then it would have a DC offset. It would be offset from center, but it's not. It goes across center. It might go lower, slower frequency for bass, and then higher frequencies, and maybe lower for lower tones, and then more for higher amplitudes. But it always crosses zero. It's going left and right equally. There is no direction for speakers. So that is the kind of absurd nonsense that drives audiophiles. And there's not enough tech people in the audio community to clear this BS up. So once you spread enough BS around, people are used to walking on it, and they just start to believe all this stuff. And yeah, get the shovel out, clear the BS off where you can actually see ground again, and maybe once you walk on the actual earth, not flat earth, but once you walk on the earth, maybe you'll get grounded. Man, I'm using all kinds of nutty terms. Anyway, guys, so that's a nutty thing. He didn't bring up that. He didn't bring up this. So this guy, see, that's why I like him, because he did bring up some things that do have some physics, well, as I say that, and I bring up the next point, conductors, copper, oxygen free. Dielectric properties, audio frequencies, come on. That's worse than the skin effect. Skin effect, at least, yeah, is starting to dielectric properties, no. Guys, the engineers designing these amplifiers, they take a lot of stuff into account, okay? There's dielectric properties of all kinds of materials, capacitors and things like that, not just wires, okay? The circuit board that are on all these things pretty much today, they used to be cheaper Chinese materials. Today, they're FR4. So FR4 has a certain dielectric property. When, at work, we're talking about doing some higher frequency stuff. And we're thinking like, oh, at some point we might have to shift away from FR4, and that's, we're like, probably 6 gigahertz or something like that. In the gigahertz, guys, it's a lot more zeros. So anyway, dielectric properties, absorbing energy, all this stuff is craziness. It's witchcraft. It's like it's the direction on the cable. When people talk about that kind of stuff, you should just run. You should just know that they have no idea about physics or what they're talking about. Shielding. Okay, shielding's a real thing. Is it meaningful? I just did a test on this for interconnects, and I was surprised to see that I'm going to do some more tests, because it just feels to me like shielding on an interconnect would be helpful, but so far I haven't seen it. But yeah, shielding's a thing. Power supply cables, no, it's not a thing. So, and termination. I'm talking about how to solder, how to put your connectors on, whether they're solder or they're cold welds, basically crimped on a gas pipe type connection, that kind of thing. That's important. Okay, so that is an important thing. Your termination, whether it's gold, silver, all that stuff. Yeah. So your cables are transferring current from one side to the other side. They have a voltage applied, the output side, which is applied to the input side, which is fluctuating, right? So there is a voltage aspect, and there's a current for sure. And with speaker cables, that's more important. With power cables, yeah, they got current going through them, but it's not your audio signals. It's power. It's going to go through a rock crusher called rectifier diodes and turn into DC, smoothed out. So the stuff before those rock crushers is meaningless. It's BS, okay? So, but, we're going to get to this $1 million thing, okay? I just want to talk a little bit about the craziness and why this topic is never put to bed. Because people selling these cables obviously don't want that to go away. To build the electronics to go in the box takes a lot more work. Putting together a cable, ordering it from some cable company, and selling it to you for extreme profit margins, that's awesome. Wow, that's where we make our money. I got this Kimber cable. I love these things. I mean, they just look cool, right? And Kimber, back in the day, this kind of cable was inexpensive. Monster and Kimber were the only two guys in town, pretty much. And Kimber, he was very, I met him, talked to him. He showed me some sound equipment, let me listen to his speakers, and showed me the difference in some phasing and all this kind of stuff. The guy was very practical. If he said you couldn't measure it, then you couldn't hear it. I'm pretty sure that that's what he was saying back then, because he had some really sophisticated measurement equipment. I mean, he was making a lot of money on cables, right? So he could buy the equipment. But Kimber's an interesting guy, and yeah, so anyway, he gave me some cables. I think he gave me those. I was building speakers back in the day. I see some brown and black ones. I think he might have given me those. Maybe I bought the red ones. I don't know. I can't remember. He was a really nice guy. He was giving me stuff. So, but yeah, and I bought these other ones though. I didn't pay the $400 or whatever it was. I forgot what I paid. I think somebody's going out of business, and I got some really nice cables. All right, guys. So this guy who talks about all these things, at the end of each one of these topics, and maybe I didn't write them all down, he says, but, there's no audible, there's no science saying this affects audio frequencies. And so he's honest, right? But then he does go on and say he still thinks cables are important, even though he can't explain it. He doesn't see any science behind it. And I'm not saying they're not important. I'm still investigating interconnects. I'm saving speaker cables last because that's the one where I really feel like I can show some measurements there. But anyway, but he is a typical audiophile in that the higher it costs, the better it sounds. So he has this rule of thumb. He says, and he's very practical though, don't change out your audio stuff until you can make a significant difference. It's not worth just getting these marginal improvements to your system, just spending money over and over and over. And so he's got some real practicality, but the belief system in that things make a difference. And hey, he's got this 3x rule. Like if you can spend 3x more on this thing, say you bought speakers for $500, unless you can spend $1,500, maybe you're getting a marginal difference. Now, I just made a note of that because, like cables, unless you're going to spend 3 times more, nah. Why does price have to do with any of it? A lot of this stuff is priced not because of how much it costs to make. The electronics part, I think, is more so that way. But once you start getting to cables, that's a huge markup. Speakers, I think there's a pretty good markup in there. I'm not sure, but I feel like the speakers have a big markup. So I think speakers are definitely where you get the best value for your dollar. But I feel like you could buy a speaker for $500 and then a $400 speaker might blow it away, right? So I think so that 3x rule, I get what he's saying, is don't just continually chasing the next best thing, spend a little bit more for this. I mean, if you were to buy an amplifier in a certain, like maybe one of these little IEMAs around $100 price range, maybe you're not going to make a significant difference until you go 2x or 3x. He's saying 3x, but that could be true because there's a price target for some of this stuff, right? Things with huge markups, the price target is the pain that the customer is willing to pay, right? Obviously, $20,000 cables, that's an obvious, that supports my argument there, right? So it's, this kind of thing, no one's going to spend 20 grand on, right? And when you are spending 20 grand on electronics, it's got to look really nice and all this stuff, be heavy, and it doesn't mean it's worth it, but it's probably got a lot more componentry in it. It's probably got more actual materials, like stuff that you had to buy. So anyway, yeah. So I just wanted to bring up this person because even though scientifically he studied all this and he had a good description of what each one of these were, as not an engineer, he gave a good description. And in the end, he said, "But I believe in cables." So, and then he talked about cables and yeah. So, and the price, like he obviously feels like more expensive is better. So, and he made a statement in there. I kind of wrote it down, but it's something I can't even read my own writing, but it's something to the effect that it's kind of arrogant for us technical people to think that we can measure everything that that can be heard. And I want to say it's kind of, on the flip side, you could say, well, it is actually arrogant to think that you can hear things that you can't measure, because there's absolutely no proof. Where I can prove that I can measure things you can't hear. I could sit here and play a 20 kilohertz tone to a huge percentage of the audience here, and you couldn't hear it. So, and that's in the audio band. So, and that's even if you're young, okay? I think 18 kilohertz is where most of us can hear, even when we're young. 20 kilohertz, maybe not, maybe so. Anyway, so the other guy who did all these measurements and that, one of the things he did is he said he admitted that in the audio band, there's no difference in cables. Well, okay, job done. I mean, I'm not going so far as to say that yet. I mean, so far I've shown the audio band, I can't measure anything in the Bode plot, and he couldn't either. Now, what he did is he went out with these 2 nanosecond pulses Guys, 2 nanoseconds. I mean, we're talking like 500 kilohertz type stuff, like super high frequency. I mean, the Class D amplifier is switching around that frequency. You can't hear the Class D amplifier switching. When I started switching power supplies way long ago in my career, the requirement back in those days, and even when I started back in the 80s, just let you know how long I've been doing it. Even back then, the requirement, and it's still, the funny thing is it still shows up in requirements today, but the switching frequency has to be over 20 kilohertz, so none of us can hear it, because no one wants to hear whining inductors or transformers. And I've had some people take those off the specs because I'm like, guys, come on. It's like, that's a holdover from like caveman days. Let's take that off. So anyway, switching at 500 kilohertz and doing a test at 500 kilohertz on the cable, we're not listening to cables play Class D switching cycles, right? We have an LC filter on the output of the Class D, and we can't hear that thing ringing either. We can't hear any of that Class D noise. So, yeah, why are we testing cables out there? And why are we talking about spectral density or spectral decay? So, yeah, if you have an RF friend that's kind of told you how to take some of these measurements, well, you're applying it to the wrong field. This is audio, and those things don't apply. They just simply don't. When I talked about cables before, I talked about, when you send an audio signal, it goes to the end of the cable and it bounces back. And if it bounces back and causes reflections or helps with this spectral decay, you have to size the cable and the traces and all this stuff when you lay out circuit boards and you're doing high-speed stuff, gigahertz stuff. You pay attention to that stuff. Audio stuff, you don't. It's miles long, guys. I think it's 2 or 3 miles long, the wavelength. So unless you have a cable that's a couple miles long, 2, 3 miles long, you don't have to worry about matching the cable length to that. Okay, and then as far as impedances on the thing, and there's this, it's where I feel like, and maybe this person is an engineer, but maybe he just doesn't understand these things very well. But he understands some of this stuff, and he seems like a super nice guy. Probably like hanging out. Maybe, I don't know. It depends on how thick his skin is, because I'd be bullshit a lot, But anyway, who knows? So the tests look scientific and all that, which is probably going to mislead a lot of people. A lot of people are going to go, wow, thanks for doing all those measurements and all those tests. Even though they're BS, All right, guys. So let's get to the $1 million challenge. I've been talking too long. And just before I do, one thing that guy, because I'm going to do these tests on cables that are actually meaningful. And he talks about LCR measurements and how they didn't show up anything. And how this 500 kilohertz test did. Bode plots don't show up anything. Well, guys, when I did the Bode plots on the cables, you saw me out those high frequencies. You saw things happening, right? Looked really crazy over here, right? Well, so the Bode plots do show that up. You don't have to do these pulse waveforms. You can use the Bode plot to show you that, just like I did. I showed all that craziness over there, okay, the high frequencies. And then I brought the Bode plot in and in. Now, his Bode plot machine probably doesn't go out those high frequencies, so he had to do these pulses, had to buy a pulse generator. Square waves. Music is not square waves. The other thing, that 2 nanosecond square pulse, if it looks square at 2 nanoseconds, you can only imagine how fast those edges are. it's not the 2 nanosecond pulse that's causing the reflections and the spectral, decays and all that stuff that he's seeing. It's those rising edges, guys. It's the mobile. It's, probably 4 times at least the frequency of these looking at. So it's in the megahertz. And when I did those Bode plots, if you go look at those curves I did, you can see what I'm showing those things. So Bode plots do show those things. Why? Because they're showing the L's and the C's and the R's. They're showing the impedance of the cable. So that's where I feel like he's not an engineer, because at first I thought he was, and then as I was listening, I'm like, if he is an engineer, he hasn't been a practicing engineer for a long time, and he doesn't really understand impedance, and he doesn't understand the things he's testing. But he does know how to operate equipment to the point where he can take measurements, I guess. So maybe he's had help with that too. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not here to bash on him, but because he comes out and he says all this stuff, and then the other thing is that he has no dog in the race or whatever. It's like, well, yes, of course he does, because he also talks about sponsors. I have no sponsors, guys. I have never had anybody pay me to do any video. Okay? Hopefully that'll change someday, but I've had no sponsors. I've had people give me equipment. And, when somebody gives me some equipment, it's a human thing. Like, you're hoping it's going to work out right, and you're hoping you're going to be able to show it in a good light, right? There's a couple things around that I've never shown just because I couldn't do that. So I just didn't show them. And maybe I should. But, I felt bad. And they're low cost enough devices that it wasn't a big deal. Anyway, maybe someday I will review some of these things just so I can get rid of them. I feel like I need to do that. But the point is I think he even mentioned that a couple of the guys that was in his listening party were actual sponsors, were actually people that brought wires from their company. So maybe they didn't pay him, so he's saying he's not sponsored because of that. But I feel like if you're testing, X number of cables, and 2 or 3 of them were brought over by the guys who made them or sell them, I feel like there's a little bit of an issue there, right? So, not sure about that. And when you have a web page and you have all those products advertising on your web page, I kind of feel like, okay, they didn't pay you for that video, but you're not making any money off those companies. You're not getting any. And he does say, well, we're a company. We have to make money. Yeah, but that's what I mean, contradictions. Talking out both sides of your face, saying one thing, then turn around and admitting this. It's like, well, just because you admitted it now doesn't mean it was okay to say that. So it still wasn't. So anyway, I just want to say, when you listen to these things and people say they don't have no horse in the race, go look, see if they have a website, and see I'm an idiot, because cables are a great way to make money. And, certain things around here that I have poo-pooed on that I think are too expensive. Those companies, they're never going to sponsor me. And they're the ones that have the money that could sponsor me. So, I kind of dug my own grave there. But, I feel like, anyway, I guess I'm traveling a different road. I'm hoping it works out for me. But, so, let me get to this $1 million challenge now, okay? Because I feel like this guy that did all these tests with this equipment, he even said, well, I didn't do a blind or double blind test. Well, then he changed his again, went back on it and said, and he told the one, I saw another video where he was actually been interviewing or talking to a guy who does speaker design. Oh, that was kind of interesting. That guy was saying, oh, you got to support things with measurements. And he's like, so I think he's thinking that spectral decay's supporting his placebo. But anyway, that was an interesting thing, because if you watch that carefully, you're like, oh, the speaker guy's saying things. One thing he said is, when he designed speakers, depending on the material that you put on the cone, makes it more lively speaker or a more warm speaker. So he designs that into speakers. And once you've designed in, say, a lively speaker, you can't make that you can't, the cables, whatever it is, you're not going to make that a warm speaker because it's designed to be lively. And on the other hand, if it's a warm speaker, you can't make that a lively speaker by putting on a cable and all of a sudden, oh, the highs came out and the stage opened and all that kind of stuff. So the speaker ultimately is the thing that's playing, being forced to play the music that the amplifier is telling it to, and that's the thing that has the most to do with the sound, right? Well, okay, so this $1 million challenge, let's just get to this, okay? So I think what kicked it off was there's an article published in Yahoo Tech, and they gave an award for the top 10 worst tech ideas, basically scam, or well, whatever they call it, is the things that were just not worth it. And one of them was this speaker cable from Pair Cable, which I don't even know if it's around anymore. It took some flack, obviously, from an article like that came out. This cable was $7,250. It's called the Anjou, ANJOU. So, so there's a guy, a pretty colorful guy, and his name is James Randi, okay? And he had the Randi Foundation. He had a couple foundations, but one of them, what he did, he started his career off as a magician, okay? And then he went into what people call debunking supernatural things or all this other stuff, okay? And he was so they call him a debunker. He didn't like that because he'd like to call himself an investigator. But with this art, I think what happened, and it was hard to find out because a lot of this stuff's not, it's interesting because it's hard to find information other than other people talking about it. Gizmodo, some kind of publication, I found that they had information on this. I'll put a link down below so you guys can do your own investigation, look at this. But so what I think happened is when this thing came out in Yahoo that listed them in the top 10, this cable as being one of the biggest, things to stay away from, worst tech things as far as just gimmicks, was this audio cable. And this is the way I understand it from my reading, so you guys look in this yourself. But it was $7,250, okay? And so this James Randi, who was a debunker at this time, or investigator, he put out this thing. He challenged the cable guy, and he said, hey, I bet you someone can't tell the difference of your cable, $7,000 cable, $7,250 cable, to just a run-of-the-mill monster cable. And back then, monsters were really inexpensive. They probably are relatively to everything else, but monster was, people weren't paying crazy money because these things, Monster and Kimmer kind of just jumped on, hey, people are paying more money for cables. The zip cord's been working forever, but wow, all of a sudden, I think somebody said, this gauge of zip cord isn't good anymore. We need a higher gauge. And then once that happened, people are like, wow, we can make money off speaker cable? They should just throw it in the box with the amplifiers, right? And I always thought, God, you get these teeny little cables and you replace it with your power cable from a lamp. Oh no, lamp you're throwing out or something. But anyway, so I think that's what kicked off the whole speaker thing. And so, 2007, guys, for me, that's not that far ago. And it's also, well enough after my college days and everything, I'm just wow. So now the guy who started this company, his name was, he was a co-founder, Michael. So his name was Adam Blake, and he was the CEO, okay? So he got his degree from Tufts University, from what I understand. I think it was a mechanical engineering degree. And then he got his MBA, his master's of business from MIT, which is pretty cool. So, so he's got, he had really good education. I mean, he came from like well-known schools, right? So kind of wonder if he had family money, because after you go to college, all that, that's expensive. And then he's becoming the CEO of all these startups and that, because he went through several startups, I guess. And I mean, this is just my research, okay? But for like right now, I believe he's the CEO of a software company now. So the audio stuff, I don't think is in his life anymore. Well, I mean, as far as that company, I think the pair connect, the pair cable companies, I don't think it's in existence anymore, or it's morphed into something else. But I don't know if he has any part in that anymore, because he went through several companies after that. So he started off with a really impressive career though. But yeah, so that's who started this audio company. And this colorful James Randi guy challenged him to, for this thing, $1 million. And then they said, well, like, who are we going to get to be the neutral guy who's going to say whether he can hear or not? Well, they had to get somebody who is in audio, and they got this Michael Fremer, I think that's how you say his name, but he was with Stereophile and Absolute Sound for many years up until just recently. I think he went back and forth to Stereophile, I believe, and Absolute Sound, I think he was with them for a long time, and he's done some other things. I think he's doing voice acting now, which is really interesting. But he's also a colorful guy, but a well-respected guy in the audio community. I mean, I remember reading both of those magazines, for those journals, for a long time, until to me, they felt like they're just full of advertisements. And I just, I wasn't getting much value. So I stopped buying them a long time ago. But anyway, but I remember him, reading his articles and that. And so they chose him to be the guy who would test these cables. But the Fremer guy, even him, he was like, he didn't want to be made a fool, right? And he's like, well, I'll tell you what, instead of doing the pair cable, how about I do my cable? And at the time, I think his cables were $18,000. I mean, yeah, so, but he probably couldn't hear any difference either. But anyway, the whole thing is this guy was a debunker. He wanted to debunk this guy, what Adam Blake was saying about his pair cables. So he was trying to debunk that. And so he wasn't doing a contest just to do a contest. But the fact that someone who feels like they have an ear that is in that business for years and years, writing articles and all that kind of stuff, you think like a guy like that doesn't have confidence in himself to hear the difference between a monster cable and a $7,000 cable, then, And so it went back and forth. All these things happened. It never happened, obviously. Never happened. And so no one won $1 million. And the guy from the pair cable, Adam Blake guy, he was trying to say, James Randi doesn't have the money. But I guess they looked at it and they go, no, the foundation has the money. His foundation definitely has the money. And so then the Fremer guy, he said, well, how about if I do the pair cable, my cable, and that cable? And so Randy's group looked at that like, well, what do you think of that? And they came back, and I think they said no. First, I think they said no. We're just trying to debunk this cable. That's the whole idea of this thing, because they were pretty confident they weren't paying out $1 million. And obviously, Michael Fremer, as good as he is, he didn't have enough confidence just to jump on that thing and do it, right? So he did offer to, and then also the cable guy, Adam Blake, he started backing out. First he was saying, no, they didn't have the money. And then he's just trying to find a way out of it, because he don't, like, I'm sure that doing this cable, him and his friends and other people probably went and listened to him. They go, oh, we love the cables, but can you hear a difference? And so no one really, to me, I think this is just a pure case of like, no, you can't hear the difference. And so no one could, would just jump on this, and they had to set up all these things. Like Fremer wanted to do his cables, and then he said, well, to appease both sides, he said, well, what if I'll take the pair of cables, give them to me, I'll see if I can hear the difference. If I can't, then we won't embarrass, we won't go through with the thing, and then Adam, I won't have to say I can't hear the difference, and he doesn't have to say, no one will know. I'll just say, I'll just do it. But obviously, if he doesn't want to go forward after that, then obviously you couldn't hear the difference, and he's not confident. So neither, so the Adam Blake guy from Pair Cable is like, yeah, I don't want to do that, because this Randy guy's just going to crap on me, which he was already challenging him, said you can't hear. So he knew that was going to come down even harder. So whether the $1 million was up at stake or not, and if $1 million wasn't up at stake, then why let this guy do it on his own? And, but you can see Fremer, he's also tried to pressure off himself. At least that's the way I read into it, guys, is that, hey, just let me go do it on my own, and then I'll do this. Some of the publications, from what I understand, that were covering this at the time, they asked the Randy guy, James Randy, like, well, why won't you let him do his reference cables? Why don't you take on that challenge? And he said, well, first of all, he was going after, I think it was because that Yahoo article that was saying that this is one of the top 10 like bad cables. This is one of the top 10 worst tech things for the year, and he wanted to debunk it and show that it truly was. And maybe, and the other thing he said about that reference cable from Fremer is, he said, the people that were interviewing him asked a question like, are you afraid that they can do something to their cable to make it so it is audible, that they can hear it? And then that way in the test they can say, oh, that's my cable, and they can choose it every time. And I think the Randy guy had like 50 tests or something. They wanted to go through 50 cycles or something like that. There's quite a few. I remember that. It's like maybe 40, 50, I don't know. There's quite a few. He wanted to make sure that they could do it. And so when they asked him, like, oh, so are you afraid that they can do something to a cable that he has at his home, and that if he listens to this at his home, that with his $18,000 reference cable, that there's something he can do? And he said, yeah, sure, of course. I mean, he's a debunker guy, right? He's probably paranoid about all kinds of things. He's like imagining that they're going to put some kind of device inside the cable so that they could hear that, and so which, for $1 million, I mean, who can you trust? Has to be legit, right? So they never got that test off. But that just goes to show you that, and more recently, somebody's started this other $1 million channel. They've tried to switch $1 million challenge, and it looks total BS the way this one's set up. It's like, seems like a joke, because anyway. But the thing is all the naysayers, all the engineers, technical people like myself saying, how do you say, where's your evidence? Where's your graphs? Why is it that none of these these cable companies have done double-blind tests? It seems like these are well-meaningful people, I think, and you always wonder, but you want to say they are, and they're just not coming across, like their technical background's not coming across, their tests aren't really set up. Guys like Amir Audio Science Review, that guy knows what he's talking about. Gene Della Sala, if I said that right, 2 thumbs up to him as well. I mean, that guy, he's in the audio business. He's, by poo-pooing cables, he's probably hurting his business, but he's just being honest. So I trust him, because I mean, he's hurting his business by not trying to sell cables. And, you know, and so people like that you have to trust. When people say, well, I have no dog in the race, but, you know, I do have all these people that are helping pay bills. And that's not a dog in the race because no one's sponsoring this video. I mean, that's not very honest. Anyway, that's just the way I understand what's going on in these videos. I could be way off. Let me know if I am. I know a lot of guys out there. I mean, it's like, cheers. So guys, yeah, I mean, I got this, you know, I wear t-shirts, you know, with rock and roll stuff for audio type stuff. And I thought this is an audio type beer, heavy metal shop, parking lot with Judas Priest. And I thought, yeah, that looks good for a Rant, you know. But yeah, the 666, it's like, and the Judas Priest scene, it's like, hey, I mean, they're just having fun, I think, but I hope. Kind of scary beer. All right. Okay, guys, so the other guy did all the measurements when he's poo-pooing LCR measurements. It's because I mean, that's what makes impedance, right? Impedance is made up of those things. And that's what makes... So, I just, yeah, had a hard time understanding how he didn't understand the Bode plot. If you just go out to higher frequency, you see the impedance changing your curve like I did. So, 2 nanosecond pulses, square wave makes no sense. And doesn't matter the amplitude because you're not getting stuff out there. So, anyway, this $1 million thing, challenge, I've heard some other people having some challenges. You know, some an analog guy back in the day. I don't know. I've heard different people. You guys let me know the challenges you've heard. Some of the guys who have amplifiers named after them, I've heard that they've kind of challenged this whole thing. And one guy who actually tried to give some credibility that he believes that things over a couple meters or something like that could probably have an effect. He goes, just keep your speaker cables short, then you can use practically anything. So I'm going to look more into this before I get some of these names and stuff. But yeah, I did a lot of research, and it's kind of funny how hard it is to find actual good, you know, evidence of anybody doing double-blind tests. I found one from a university, and then when I went back to find it again, I couldn't find it. But it was back in the, I think it was in the 90s, and I wanted to say it was up in New York or something like that, or even in Canada, but it was somewhere around the border, like, you know, northeast, I believe. And I think they took like 20 people or 30 people, and they did a bunch of double-blind tests, and no one could, you know, pick out anything with any kind of credibility. So, and that was, I got to find that paper because that was published, and so it was, well, I mean, people heard about it, and then I believe that my belief is a lot of people. I was in an audio club, North Carolina, and there's guys, and there's a guy who wrote speaker books that was in that group. I'll bet you a lot of these guys have done these double-blind tests, and they can't pick out anything with any kind of credibility. So nothing's published, nothing's talked about, and that's why audio cable guys don't show anything. And so we just keep talking about it. So I'm going to keep doing tests, and then eventually I'll come to some kind of final thing, you know, statement on this. But yeah, for now, I haven't found anything in interconnects that can show any difference. Power cables, no difference. There can't be. And I'm a power supply engineer, been a power supply guy for a long time. Like I said, started off talking about all these expensive labs I've been doing, all this stuff. If power cords made any difference, we would have used them for sure. So, and it's crazy how people think cables are used as filters. Oh, gosh. All right, guys. Sorry about this long rant. This has gone way too long. and I did a lot of research on this, and it was probably too late tonight, and I was probably too tired. Sorry. Probably low energy, and sorry about that. Sorry about the long video. Hope you guys liked it. If you watched this long, do you mind giving a like to the video, sharing it, whatever, and subscribing if you haven't done so. I'm going to try to keep my videos shorter. I'm going to do some more tests here. I've got a bunch of amplifiers. Once I get the tests where I feel like I've got tests that actually show something, I'm going to start cycling some amplifiers through here. Okay, so got this one here I'm really excited about. I want to test this one too. So I've got a stack of them. So all right guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.